Hang on. Mwah! Hello and welcome to Comic Island. I think I'm streaming and broadcasting right now. My browser's being a little funny about it, but it looks to be working. Let me know if the music's too loud or if you can hear the music at all. Maybe you can't. There. Probably something now. Anyways, thanks for joining me. I have dressed up for our little Halloween stream in the most terrifying activity you can do in 2020, air travel. Woo! And we've got a cool special book where we're going to be talking about The Doomed and the Damned, #1. A fun 80-page special book DC put out with 10 different stories, all of which are kind of themed along the lines of team-up adventures in a horror setting, with a cool mix of different writers and artists. It seems to me the general theme across these 10 stories is we either have a big-name writer working with some relatively new artists, or a relatively new writer working with some well-established big-name artists. And that leads to a very cool combination where DC gets to show off some new talent and let them take their turn at various characters in the DC universe, while we also get to celebrate some big names, including some that, are usually known for stuff like Marvel. Thanks for joining us, Karsten, Raphael, everyone else coming in on stream. And overall, it's a pretty fun book. When you get names like we have Riley Rossmo, Saladin Ahmed, Ivan Placencia, a couple other pretty big names. Marv Wolfman writes a story, Garth Ennis does one. You can expect some pretty cool stuff. I also like DC's general mix of different characters, and we have some really cool, pretty creative team-ups. So we get a range of stuff like each of the Trinity gets a team up, and Wonder Woman has a pretty straightforward choice in terms of like she gets paired with Raven, which that made sense. Superman gets paired with Swamp Thing, which is pretty fun, but not that wild. But then Batman has a little story on his own. And then on the other hand, we get really wild team-ups like Madame Xanadu working with Man-Bat, Green Lantern teaming up with Etrigan. That's pretty straightforward. But then Solomon Grundy and Ra's al Ghul, Bader and Darkseid, Beast Boy and Klarion, Aquaman and Frankenstein. So a fun mix of stuff overall. Oh, everyone's saying I look good in the costume. Well, thanks. It's an old costume. I just thought I'd dress up as something for Halloween for this stream. I have a different plan for something tomorrow, but that involves wearing a mask because I'll be out and about. And I figured I'd change it up a bit for this stream and thought of the very simple airliner joke that I burned at the beginning of the stream, and now I'll just get to wear this costume. So that's fun. But overall, I think I would recommend it. If you're looking for whether or not this is a genuinely creepy book, I might not be the best judge of that because I tend not to easily be frightened, especially not by comics. But I found there was some pretty good spooky stories overall. I thought it was an interesting sign that the Superman Swamp Thing story was the one that I found the creepiest. That's a pretty cool thing that I think speaks well to the book, because you can have a character like Superman take a step towards horror in a genuine direction, and it still worked, which I liked quite a bit. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But the last two stories are pretty much straight comedies. A lot of this book plays around with comedy, and that's pretty normal for horror. But the last two books really feel like they're completely on the side of just being for laughs. And that's fine, but if you're looking for just like a horror comic, I'm sure there's been a lot of other fun publications in October. We reviewed stuff like Stillwater, which has been a lot more of a straight horror book. So you should just be warned of that, because at two stories, that's a full fifth of this book. And all of these stories are pretty well spaced apart in terms of them being an equal page count and them feeling about an equal length, more or less. And I don't dislike the second last story, but the last one I found pretty empty. So it is what it is. It's always going to be a bit of a mix with these kind of anthology books, but DC's done a pretty good job with them this book, and I feel they made a fun horror take overall that's worth your time, I'd say, on the whole. Raphael says, how does Man-Bat always end up with Justice League dark supernatural themes? Is he still a Batman villain? That's interesting, because they keep going in that direction. It felt right for this story. He very much feels like more of a typical superhero, though, in his story, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit as we venture into spoiler territory. Although I don't want to get too spoilery, because I feel the more I give away the game, the more I completely wreck these books, because they're all scary themed. Once you get that twist, you're not going to get much out of it. But yeah, the first book is about Man-Bat being recruited by Madame Xanadu to deal with some sort of haunting in Gotham. And they track down this ghost who leads them to an apartment with an old lady living there. And they investigate the mysterious goings-on there. There's a good twist in this one, and I don't really want to give it away, but it features a fun appearance by a character that we haven't been introduced to before, but belongs to a faction that has been well established in DC, and it even calls back to a specific story. And our two heroes are able to resolve things in a pretty fun, non-violent way that I found was almost touching. It was a good ghost story overall. It was written by John Arden. It's hard to read this lettering. Arcaducci, I believe. Maybe I can check it from the front here. Yeah, John Arducci wrote it, Mike Perkins did the artwork, Andy Troy did coloring, and Tom Napolitano did the lettering. Aside from the little credit scene, it's good lettering and stuff, and I found it a touching book and a strong start to this, especially because it features such atypical characters in the form of Man-Bat and Madame Xanadu. Carson says, who do you think would win in a fight, Swamp Thing or Man-Thing? I would say definitely Swamp Thing, because he's way, way more powerful. Our next story is interesting because while most of these stories, and it is advertised as a team-up book, are really focused on two superheroes teaming up, this is pretty much a Batman solo story. Although you could argue he is technically teaming up with a one-off little boy character who lives at this group home for wayward children of some form or another, where his brother has fallen mysteriously ill. The people at the home try and reassure him, and he's being taken to a hospital, and they say they're going to care for the kid, but he says that Mr. Slow Death appeared through a mirror and grabbed the boy, and he's going to die like another child did at this home. And the only person who wants to listen is Batman. Now, well, actually, maybe we'll leave it there. It's a fun story kind of playing up the whole Bloody Mary mythology, or maybe something like Candyman. Oh, well, we'll see you later, Karsten. Thanks for joining us in the chat. But it's a very Batman-bent story, and it's kind of very sinister and surreal. Mr. Slow Death, as we see him, is very H.R. Giger in his design, and kind of looks creepy and has those sort of exoskeleton things going on with him. He's a cool monster just to show up in this book. I'm pretty sure just as a one-off creation by Leonardo Manco, who did the artwork, and Mike Spicer, who did the coloring, and he might be one of the best colorists out there in comics right now. He keeps showing up in different books here and there, and every time he does a phenomenal job. This book is beautifully drawn by those two, and just looks amazing. Batman really is a presence in this book, and he is just kind of off investigating this mystery and trying to explore whether or not this urban legend is the real thing. And it's kind of cool because it really takes someone like Batman, where only one kid has disappeared or has died before this second child got sick before he's on it and investigating. And it really feels like, oh, like this is the world's greatest detective. And as for who wrote it, well, that was Saladin Ahmed. I think this is the first time I've seen him write a DC story. I don't know if he has done them before. Maybe he has, and I'm blanking on it right now. But he did an excellent job. And sure enough, it has a really nice ending, too. Maybe I will give away this one just because it's worth talking about. They do eventually save the little boy's brother, and the adults that run the group home investigate, and they're like, oh, yeah, it looks like you trashed the bathroom and your brother got better. Meanwhile, we couldn't find any evidence of Batman or any sort of monster, but his brother believes him, and his brother even points up to the roof of the little group home thing, and they see Batman kind of swinging away. And they both know, like, oh no, that all really happened. It wasn't made up or like some horrible nightmare on the part of the kid. It's a really wonderful little story. Raphael says, since Swamp Thing is powered by the green, doesn't Man Thing have some kind of plants around him? Oh, Karsten said Man Thing, not Man Bat. I was like, Man Bat really wouldn't stand much of a chance against Swamp Thing. Man Thing kind of has something similar going on with him, but I do think, like Raphael is saying in chat, killing Swamp Thing is so difficult, and because he's empowered by the green, in a way I don't think quite compares to Man Thing. Swamp Thing would still have an advantage in that fight. Anyways, moving on to the next story. It's a real simple one. It's all about Green Lantern teaming up with Etrigan to take on this crazy escaped alien monster from that got out of prison on Oa, and as Etrigan reveals, actually escaped from hell. So they both kind of feel they have a claim to taking down this monster, and it's drawn by recurring artist of this channel, and kind of a personal favorite of mine at this point, Riley Rossmo, and his colorist, basically, Ivan Placencia, doing an excellent job at telling a really dynamic story. Up until now, we usually see them in more I've usually seen these two drawing more grounded kind of stuff, generally focused on the world around Batman and Robin, and even the Shadow. So getting them going full demon and space cop with Green Lantern and Etrigan was great, and these two do a phenomenal job at drawing Hal Jordan's constructs as he battles this gigantic monster. And Tim and Etrigan kind of have this competitive spirit. It's really well done because Etrigan obviously isn't above killing people, and this monster is infecting people in Coast City and turning them into basically copies of itself. So the demon wants to kill them, and Hal Jordan basically has to defend himself. But because of Hal Jordan's personality, he's also kind of willing to overlook that to a degree. And he does say he will take Etrigan in after all of this, although he does eventually let that point go, which feels like it's up in his personality. But he also kind of treats it more competitively than just this huge moral conflict. And it ends up being a very fun little story. After that, we have a story called Inner Demons. Wonder Woman teams up with Raven to fight this demonic being that has possessed this little girl. This is a really interesting story because it's very simple. It has Wonder Woman kind of almost sacrificing herself and letting her get possessed by a demon, which, as Raven points out, is a terrible idea. But it's a very, I would say, Trinity move. Any of the DC Trinity I could see doing this, where they would be willing to sacrifice themselves, even though that sacrifice makes a situation worse, where you now have a demon possessing a god. And that's a terrible idea. But this story, and it's otherwise just these two kind of going up against a demon. But this story's all in the execution and the artwork. It's written by Amanda Daybert, Danielle Sempere does the artwork, and Adriano Lucas does the coloring. Seda Temofonte does the lettering. And they tell this story with really bright red pastel colors, with a really that sets this mood. And this whole girl is possessed as a result of this what are they called? It's the Church of Blood doing this, and it's really well drawn and done to kind of tell a story that, like, on its surface is kind of stupid, I would almost say, where, yeah, Wonder Woman shouldn't be willing to be possessed by the demon, and Raven wants it to just go into, like, someone who's going to die soon, so the demon can't do much damage. They can't banish it or kill it outright is the idea, and they don't want to kill the girl, which, like, both heroes agree on. So it's a really interesting kind of conflict, and the way that this story is resolved is that Wonder Woman, like, Raven recognizes that Wonder Woman ultimately has to solve this problem her own way and just destroy this demon by being something that the demon can't corrupt and can't merge with. And it's one of those situations where, like, Wonder Woman kind of just plants her feet. And like I say, I could see any of the DC Trinity doing this and staying to their morals, and it just somehow kind of works out for them without any real cost. But none of that really matters because the story is drawn so well, and the lighting, like the coloring is just so good in terms of establishing a mood, and the pencils are just really detailed and showcase a story. Possessed Wonder Woman does look terrifying and is well drawn, and on the whole, this is one of the strongest stories, even though the story itself is kind of weak. It's all in how it's told, and that really matters for horror especially. I feel it doesn't really necessarily have to make a ton of sense. We're talking about horror comic books or even just horror stories in general. It's all in how it's kind of told, the pacing, and the tone. And that's why later when we kind of veer out of these creepy stories into outright comedy, I get a little miffed because it sort of ruins that mood. Raphael says in chat how Wonder Woman and Raven is an interesting team-up. More of them would be nice. It feels very natural to me, the kind of thing that would happen on Justice League Dark or something like that. And these two paired together is a cool, story. And that whole ending where I was talking about the differences between these two and how Raven has to come to recognize it plays into what Raphael was saying about how it is a very strong team-up. They could carry a series together and it would be very interesting, but even like a Brave and the Bold style team-up would work well for them. Next up is a very weird story written by Marv Wolfman, and I think that almost is self-explanatory for why it's weird and stuff. It's drawn by Tom Mandrake, and I'm guessing someone Tom was related to, spouse Sion Mandrake does the coloring. Charles M. Manguel does the lettering. Oh, and I guess we'll throw it in. Michael McAllister does the editing. This is a really interesting story where Ra's al Ghul apparently creates a Solomon Grundy, or the Solomon Grundy, and uses him to sort of restore his body and the Lazarus Pit. I'm not exactly sure how this reads, but it's almost like a prequel of Ra's and Talia setting up the League of Assassins. And it's a pretty fun story once I got wind of what I'm doing, or what I was reading. It's always fun to read something by Marv Wolfman, who's obviously like a big legend in the history of DC Comics. And as far as a villain team-up story with another villain, it was pretty great. Ra's is on point. Grundy got to do his thing. They used his poem in a fun way where it's not really recited, but rather part of the narration, which I think is pretty fun. Thanks for joining us, Tevia. And thanks for the compliment on the costume. And I like that story. Next up is actually one of my favorites, and like I said, the one that actually evoked the creepiest overtones to it. And it's with Superman, which I thought was really cool. So it's written by Amadeo Turturro. Max Fumaria does the artwork, Dave Stewart does the coloring, Adida Biokar does lettering, and Andrew Marino does editing. So Superman teams up with Swamp Thing to investigate these really creepy crops that have emerged in this town, and it looks like everything's almost ashen, but still these like really ripe fruits are growing, including oranges, which where does this story take place even? I don't think it says, but it doesn't look anywhere like Florida or somewhere where oranges would grow. So Superman kind of calls in Swamp Thing in a fun little moment, and those two investigate. I don't actually want to give away who's behind it, but it's a great twist And you kind of learn that the whole town, which has been eating this crop, has been infected by what's going on in this story. And they all turn into these monstrous versions of the villain behind all of this. And I really like it. It's kind of creepy because both Superman and Swamp Thing agree that they don't want to kill these townspeople, but they don't know what to do because there's just this unstoppable force acting against them. And in the end, they kind of work together and manage to find a way to change, or like to stop the villain. And the villain's basically at their mercy and kind of begs for their help. And Superman kind of gives this whole little speech where he convinces Swamp Thing to give the villain a chance to make things right. And sure enough, they work together with the villain to at least save some of the townspeople. But it's a cool story where it's not just like the stakes are let go. People die as a result of this, and a lot of the narration kind of revolves around this little girl who apparently perishes as a result of all of this. And like I said, the idea of people having this villain grow inside of them and turn them all into monsters was a really cool idea. There's a moment where Superman uses his X-ray vision to realize the girl is sick, and then he kind of uses it to scan the rest of the village and realize all these people are infested. And it's one of the strongest stories in the book, and that's why I'm kind of dancing around the big spoiler of it. But I definitely would recommend it. It's really well drawn, and you need that kind of artwork to be on point to convey creepy little moments like this. And I would say out of all the books, this is the most successful. The next one is more of a classic team-up story, but one that reminds me of the 1990s a lot. It involves Cassandra Cain as Orphan teaming up with Orca to take on this ship that's like kidnapped children and is dumping bodies out in the ocean. So they both kind of have motivations to take out everyone on the ship. There's a lot of fun action, and it's a cool focus on off the beaten path characters, I would say. I really like the team up, and there's a fun, vivid energy between these two as they take on these criminals. It's not really scary, but there is a certain creepy element to it in the more criminal sense of like dealing with these messed up dudes who are doing these terrible things to kids. And there's just something fun and cathartic about these two tough as nails characters taking on a boat full of people. It's written by Alyssa Wong, and I think that's a big part of why, again, like a simple story works. And you also have excellent artists with Dominique Domo Stanton doing the pencils and inks, Marisa Luis doing coloring, Tom Napolitano doing lettering. And then we get to my favorite story out of these 10 featured as part of this DC team-up thing. And it's between Frankenstein and Aquaman. And basically, Aquaman brings along his kid after Frankenstein calls him in to investigate this body that Frankenstein comes across on Mars. And the two of them end up tracing it to Wisconsin, and it leads to this whole little adventure where this group of pirates are trying to steal water to use on Mars. And they're like leftovers from the Cadmus project that are able to cobble together these vast resources to set up this giant oil refinery out in the ocean to do so. So this mystery kind of takes them across like Mars and Earth. And it's really fun to see Frankenstein super annoyed by Aquaman's kid, but gradually growing attached to the little father and daughter duo. And they end up having a wonderful little adventure that ends on Mars with a fun little twist. It's beautifully drawn by Valdemar Rivas and Ivan Placencia, who also colors this book and knocks it out of the park. These vast vistas of Mars we're treated to, where we get to see like the stars and the red Martian landscape, is wonderful. And fans of DC's Frankenstein as well as Aquaman will enjoy a real treat as seeing these two team up together. Raphael and Tevye are both pretty excited about the idea of that team up. And yeah, it's excellent. They are a real cool team. It's not a typical choice, but it's really fun. I wouldn't say it's horror themed any more than just the simple fact that Frankenstein's involved, but that's all you really need, and there's enough of a serious tone to it At this point, the book really has me won over, and I would say out of the 8 books, all 8 are worth reading and totally worth your time. The next one is also pretty cool because it features Beast Boy teaming up with Klarion the Witch Boy. And fans of Seven Soldiers are really in for a treat for this book and will most especially enjoy The Doomed and the Damned #1 because we have Klarion and Frankenstein show up, and there's plenty of references to Grant Morrison's Seven Soldiers, as well as stories that have featured them both since. This is a fun team up, and we'll get into why. I guess I have to spoil it a bit just to give away what's great about it, but the art and stories by Travis Moore, and he nails it. Rarely do we get artists kind of branching into writing and it working so well where you wouldn't really know it unless you read it on the little credit caption here. And he does an excellent job. Alejandro Sanchez does the coloring, and he uses a very kind of soft but not outright into pastel territory coloring that gives this book a very light fare. Like I said, it's outright comedy, but there is some really creepy imagery, and if we kind of ended things there, it would be pretty good. Maybe I won't give it away. This book uses the whole Horrigal plot device from Seven Soldiers very effectively with Beast Boy, though, and it ends on a hilarious, absolutely funny joke where basically... Okay, I guess I'll have to give it away. Klarion gets jealous of Beast Boy and Raven kind of being on a date at a little carnival thing, and he kidnaps Raven. And sensing as Ghul, his familiar, picks up on these feelings and kidnaps Raven. So Klarion and Beast Boy are forced to team up and go after Raven. And in the end, the only way they can overpower and subdue Ghul is by combining into the Horrible Beast in a terrifying looking creation where the two of them emerged, and basically Raven is pretty confident she'll be able to separate them once they've pacified the little familiar cat. It's a wonderful, heartwarming story. So before she does so, she goes on a little double date with the two characters, and it's a very fun moment, I have to say. It really won me over with its charm, even though aside from the imagery, it's really not horror themed at all. But that's fine. Where I kind of lose a little bit is the final book, which is a team up between Bader and Darkseid. It's written by Garth Ennis, art is by PJ Holden, and colors are by John Kalsich. It's fun, but it is also a straight comedy where Darkseid finds himself in a bar and ends up in a drinking contest with Bader, who apparently has stopped being a villain and opened up a bar in some rinky-dink rundown place with all these weird characters kind of watching the drinking contest go down, and even Batman pops in to cheer on the two of them having a drinking contest. It's very goofy, and I guess it's a little bit of lighthearted fun to take you out of the book, but I do want to kind of just warn people that as we kind of get near the end of this book, it's it really strips away all of those horror feelings. Personally, I like Seven Soldiers. I was willing to, I knew what I was kind of going in for when I got a Garth Ennis book at the end, to kind of expect it to just be a goofy thing. And I did kind of like the idea of them just having a drinking contest. So I do like it, but I do kind of want to warn people that there's a weird comedy bent that sort of takes you out of any feelings of ooh, this is creepy or spooky or fun. It is still fun, but it definitely just switches to comedy in the last third of the book. I will give the editors behind this thing credit that they did structure it well, that at least these comedy books aren't interspersed into it. I think that would have made the experience worse. They keep you in a creepy mood until they want to take you out of it, and that is pretty strong. Overall, a solid recommendation and definitely a fun pickup around Halloween. Tevia says, I miss Beast Boy and Raven as a couple. And Quantum D&T Play says, yeah, for real. I like Kid Flash though as well. And Raphael says, I don't think they would last as a couple. There's some interesting thoughts there. I kind of like how they played around with it a bit, where she goes on a double date with Beast Boy and Klarion, and just having a little bit of fun with different romantic interests like that. Klarion was kind of on point and written very much like he was in Grant Morrison's era, where he's got like kind of that boyish spirit, but is also kind of like, once again, the worst character in the story. And I like that combination. Quantum D&T play then adds as a fun idea, Jason Todd and the Joker's daughter. Well, talk about dysfunctional. So anyways, maybe we'll leave things there at the 30-minute mark, but I definitely enjoyed this book overall and would recommend it, like I said. Thanks so much for everyone who joined me for a late night stream, kind of sort of prefacing Halloween, because I know by the time YouTube is done processing this stream, it will be tomorrow. So that way everyone can kind of enjoy it for Halloween. I sort of deliberately timed it that way because I knew my schedule was going to be pretty tight on Saturday, Halloween itself. So I hope you all have a very happy Halloween, and you all enjoy yourselves and stay safe out there, whatever you may end up doing. And thanks a lot for joining me, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island. We're actually, the plan is, I have been playing around a little bit with like the scheduled order of streams lately, so we'll see, but the plan is to talk about an Image graphic novel. So I hope you all enjoy it, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island.